there's a report from Bloomberg, I believe it was, that Sony was cutting their uh, PSVR2 headset output, uh, basically due to low pre-orders. And I was also seeing, I forget who gave these numbers, but I think the original number that Sony thought they were going to sell within the first quarter release window was 2 million, and they've cut that to 1 million. Um, that's like expected to sell, I believe. Tom Warren followed up on a tweet where he was boosting this Bloomberg article and basically said Sony says it has not cut PlayStation VR2 production numbers, which was the original report. And he said so, denying the Bloomberg report. Um, Nonetheless, I think there is an expectation that they aren't going to hit the original mark that they thought they were going to with PSVR2.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Right.
Pessimist in me. It's a hard bargain. I mean, this is not going to get people to buy PS5s, as we've said,
Mm-hmm.
100 times on this podcast. Um, and everyone is saying, well, why would I pay if I don't have any VR setup whatsoever? Why would I pay over $1,000 for a PS5 and this when I can just get the Oculus Quest or whatever the baseline one is for less than the headset is alone
Mm-hmm.
for the PSVR2? Obviously, that's like neglecting the fact that, in my opinion, the Oculus Quest is not that good,
Mm-hmm.
but it is good for most people.
Right.
And at this point, like, we're still kind of in the gimmicky, this is fun kind of stage of VR. Um, but it's a hard bargain for people who want to get into VR. I mean, again, I have to use myself as the case study. I really like VR.
Mm-hmm.
I still play my original PSVR, but it's not worth over $1,000 to me.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the thing that's like the shame of it. If PSVR was simply just like a PlayStation like gimmick, I'll say. That's maybe tough wording, but if it was simply just like nothing more than like an accessory, kind of just like a cool novelty thing, like it'd be fine. But like I feel like there's a really good chance to push the VR uh world forward here. And so this is a real missed opportunity to not ensure that it like gets to people, right? Like this could ultimately PSVR2 with what it's sounding like could be really good for the VR landscape. And uh yeah, the price point though alone. I mean, hell, just $550 for it up front is it's a lot of money, you know?
Mhm.
And then to your point, like the fact that you need to have another piece of hardware first, again, if it were just like a novelty thing, if it was just like simply a PS accessory, no big deal because like you're trying to only sell it to your base. But in this sense, like you kind of need to bring people who aren't in your base in first, then give them this. And that's just tough. Like that's a lot all at once.
I'm kind of shocked. I expected these to sell out pretty quickly. Um, the PS5 is I think this is correct, but someone can fact check me. I think is the highest selling console between that and the Series X.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. It's a little scary that it didn't. They basically only hit half of their um, estimate for these. Like who are you selling to then? Because I feel like we're in this weird space of VR where it's like Sony obviously has the IP to have these awesome experiences in VR.
Right.
I just watched a video. I think it was from PlayStation Access, which obviously they're biased, but They got to do a demo of the new Horizon game. I forget what the subtitle is.
Call of the Mountain, Call of the
Is
Wild.
that it? I think Call of the Mountain sounds right. Um, and, like, from the gameplay they were showing and, like, what they were talking about with their experience, like, it's really cool and really immersive.
Hmm.
It looks great, but how many people wanna be in a narrative world in VR? Like, I feel like a lot of people are still just kinda pulling out a VR headset as a party trick to play Beat Saber.
Right. No, I mean
Um,
you're 100% right.
which I
Uh,
think sucks. Like, I obviously want these big narrative worlds in VR. I've plugged a ton of hours into PSVR and the games that came out.
right, and I think this was like the good opportunity to get people who are into narratives into VR, right? Because it's like, I look at VR and it's like I love story games. Like, so I feel like the VR experiences that I had the most fun with were like the I expect you to die,
Mhm.
where it's like, right, is that what the name of it was?
Yeah,
Um
that was like the escape room kinda game.
yeah, like
Yeah.
that. And there's like like I don't know, it's not just like Guitar Hero or, Beat Saber effectively, where it's like arcadey, um, still fun, obviously, but like um if those are the only types of games, it's just like, I can kind of pass on it. But yeah, as
Mhm.
soon as you get, like you said, like PlayStation's big IPs in there, like, hell, if you just made a God of War like $5 game that lets you walk around Midgard, that'd be sick as hell, right? Like, um, just allowing you to explore the worlds that they've created. But I mean, I think the idea of giving these like actual like fleshed out narrative like experiences is sick. Um, it's just a matter of convincing the right people now to get a VR. I think these numbers I think with how vocal people are, I agree with you. I also thought like this is gonna sell like hotcakes, and like they're not gonna learn any sort of lesson here, right? Like it's I always draw the comparison, but it's like kind of the Apple thing where it's like I'm gonna make you pay $200 for a dongle, and everybody will complain about it, but everybody just still does it in the end, and so they just
Right.
keep doing it. That's kind of what I expected to happen because people are so vocal, to shout out all the fanboys, but it turns out that they're all broke ass, bitch ass, can't afford no $550 piece of hardware. Um, so I don't know. I think people were vocal about like their support for it, and then you know when it came time to actually like, okay, now Sony's like, okay, hands out, like now buy it. People were just like, oh no, I wasn't serious. I was just trying to use you. I was just trying to use you to dunk on the Xbox over there. Our PSVR has more games than Xbox.
Mm.
uh, so I don't know if it was like somewhat that or what, but um, yeah, I kind of felt like this shit's gonna sell, and it's always just gonna be this expensive like paywall for people who probably would actually get really into it. But yeah, hopefully this shows like I feel like it's kind of like a console itself, where it's like you sell it knowing that like you're not gonna necessarily make money on the hardware itself, but it's like the experience that you can give with that is what's going to pay dividends in the long run. And so I don't know like I don't know what their profit margin is or anything like that on these headsets. I'm sure they do need to be expensive, but I just question, does it need to be $550 expensive? Does
So
it
I
need to
will
be
say
more
this,
expensive than a console?
the PSVR 1's build quality was dog shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's got, like, fake leather on it, and it's the kind of fake leather that, like, all Sony products use. I don't know if you've ever bought, like, or I should say PlayStation branded Sony products, because like, Sony headphones, like, high quality ones don't have this issue. I don't know if you've ever bought any of, like, the PlayStation branded headsets,
Yes, sir.
but if you use them long enough,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've had this experience, like mine, they're about to get thrown out because 'cause they're literally just disintegrating.
Yeah, I admittedly haven't had the issue with the I think they're called the Pulse
Is that the
headset.
PS5 one?
Maybe, but whatever the one gold I think was the PS4
Mhm.
one. I have both. I have a gold and I have a Pulse, and um, I mean I don't use them like religiously. Um, so I haven't had an issue with either of those, but I do remember my PS3 ones, which I believe were PlayStation branded. Um, but now I can't remember. I do believe those started to have that like deteriorating issue.
Y
And like
Yeah,
it
and
just
in
gets like
all
peely and everything and it's
yeah,
gross.
and in all fairness, my PlayStation headset is from the PS3 era. I got it, like, right at the end of it, and they ended up, like, basically repackaging it and selling it for PS4 as well, so it
Hmm.
was, like, the premium PS4 headset. Um, but the PSVR1 was made of the same shit,
Yeah.
and I got to the point where, like, I couldn't use the VR without there being, like, black flakes all over my face, so I just, like, caved and peeled all that shit off,
Hmm.
and, like, I can't imagine just seeing the PSVR2. It looks like it's made of the same dog shit materials that Sony uses for PlayStation products. Like, I would be pretty mad if I bought this thing for $550 and then, you play it and I like people are like, "Oh, well, you need to wipe it down after use." Well, I did that. I
Right.
had like a dedicated like microfiber cloth that every time I was done playing it, I wiped it down and it still didn't help.
Right.
Um, so that kind of bothers me. I think they're probably making a pretty good profit on this. I don't think it's I mean, once you get past the engineering costs, the R&D, like that's the biggest expense of this, but to actually produce them, they're probably pennies on a dollar.
Yeah.
Um so I have this weird internal conflict. I've been thinking about this a lot. Is $1,100 really that much for a VR headset, like or a VR experience, the whole setup? And I'm thinking back to the first time that I ever played VR, and I was working for a computer company, and we would build custom computers for people. And the HTC Vive had just come out, and we built a rig and bought the HTC Vive as like a demo unit. And I mean, you weren't spending less than $2,000 for this whole rig. I mean, you needed a $1,300 computer at bare minimum.
Hmm.
And then I think the Vive was like $1,100 when it came out alone for the headset and like the zoning equipment.
Right. Sometimes that's just like the price of early tech.
Yeah, I mean it always is.
Right.
But I would say VR is still relatively nascent, and
Yeah.
we're talking this was probably 2015, 2016, so less than 10 years ago, and the price is pretty much already halved for a similar experience.
And on top of yeah. Yep. Yeah. Like yeah, you're having both components of it. Your the system requirement and the the hardware itself. Um, because obviously, I'm assuming if you build a $1,300 PC, you're not simply using it technically for VR, right? Like,
Right.
uh, you'd also hopefully be like playing other games on it, which is to in this scenario the PS5. You wouldn't just pay $500 for a PS5 just to play VR. You'd end up playing other games on it. That would at least be the assumption.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're in my case where it would basically just be VR and then like first party games, but all other games would probably get played on an Xbox.
Right. You would still technically be playing those first party games, so
True. And that would
but
be a significant amount.
yeah, but no, but I mean, it's still technically limited in the end, which again can play into the argument of is it actually worth it to get right now? And so
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, uh, yeah, I just feel like this is a miss on Sony's part. They have a good lineup, um, for the VR, that I think is pretty exciting. Um, but I think it's
It's
just too
exciting
big of
for
a barrier.
yeah, it's exciting for someone who likes PlayStation,
Sure. Yeah.
which is fine. Like there's no I'm excited about it, but that's not going to get the masses. I mean, the average person is not really going to care all that much.
That's fair.
So, and I don't, I really don't know with the VR market if companies can afford to be niche right now. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
um, I think that's kind of what we're going to learn. I don't think the PSVR2 is going to fail. Um, considering they're already, and I know they only sold like half of what they were expecting so far, but when the PSVR came out, nobody was buying VR.
Right.
So we're already off on a better foot. Um, I imagine they'll probably cut the price down pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Um, I would say probably by this time next year, it'll be at least $50 cheaper. I don't know if they might even run it even more aggressively around the holidays just to get it into people's hands.
Right.
Because they need to. I mean, I think Sony needs to understand. It seems like they've really put the investment into this space. They're paying their studios to make games, so they need to figure out, what's going to make more money, selling the hardware at a premium or getting the hardware into people's hands so they can buy the games. I imagine it's the latter.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what sort of bundles they potentially do of like console and VR, like
Yeah,
bundled together. Because you could like do something that's like a pretty darn good deal. Um, that would obviously still be fairly expensive, but um, try and make it at least a little bit easier, especially for those who aren't already like in.
right.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Um, yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think it's gonna fail. It just sometimes stuff like this can kind of worry me, because like a company could make like a rush decision where they miss out on like the numbers that they were projecting, and so then they just I don't think Sony's gonna do this, but it causes them to just go, all right, we just don't care about VR anymore. Looking at you, Vita.
Mm.
So been a fresh wave of Sony and Xbox should get into the handheld, but I've been seeing Vitas pop up on my timeline again, and
Yeah, me too. This week.
big fan, big fan. As somebody
Oh yeah.
who just bought a PSP Go in 2023, big fan.